In this lecture, let's install a text editor for writing code. Writing code can be performed with any text editor. We can use Notepad or even a Google document. However, there are editors dedicated to writing code. These types of editors have features for debugging and helping us write code. In most cases, you should download a text editor specializing in writing code. In regards to Unity game development, there are three popular choices. The most common choice is Visual Studio. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide links to the editors mentioned in this lecture. During installation, the Unity Hub recommended this editor to us. Visual Studio is an editor for writing applications with C#. Not only does Microsoft manage the C# programming language, but they also have an editor for writing it. There's another editor called Visual Studio Code. It shares a similar name to Visual Studio. On top of that, this editor was created by Microsoft. Sounds confusing, right? Two editors created by the same company with similar names. What's the difference? Visual Studio was launched over 2 decades ago. It's Microsoft's oldest editor for writing code. Over the years, it has established itself as an editor for writing C# code. As the years went by, the web grew exponentially. Unlike desktop applications, websites were written with different programming languages. Rather than extending Visual Studio, Microsoft introduced a new code editor with support for creating websites. Originally, Visual Studio Code was a product aimed at web development. However, developers realized two things. Firstly, Visual Studio Code is easier to extend with custom extensions. Secondly, the development experience is more pleasant than Visual Studio. Every day, developers are switching from Visual Studio to Visual Studio Code. For this reason, we're going to use Visual Studio Code. It's beginner-friendly and ships with minimal features. Let's download and install it. I've already installed Visual Studio Code on my machine. This installation process is straightforward. Keep clicking Next until you've reached the end. While Visual Studio Code is downloading, let me mention another popular editor called Writer. Writer is a code editor developed by an independent private company. Unlike other editors, this editor costs money. It's up to you to decide whether it's worth the price. I've met a handful of Unity game developers who use Writer. After installing Visual Studio Code, another program must be downloaded. As mentioned before, Visual Studio Code was intended for web development. Out of the box, support for other programming languages is not available. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to download the .NET platform. Our code must be transformed into machine code. Machines are not able to understand code until it has been transformed. The .NET platform is a tool for transforming C# code into machine-readable code. From the page, download the SDK. Do not install the runtime version. Be sure to install the SDK relevant to your operating system. Once again, I've installed this program on my machine. I will not be going through the installation. The process for installing this program is similar to installing Visual Studio Code. Keep clicking Next until reaching the end. We're almost finished. The next step is to force Unity to open Visual Studio Code. Open the project we've been working on. Under the Edit menu, click on the Preferences submenu item. Click on the External Tools section. There's a setting called External Script Editor. This setting will instruct Unity to open Visual Studio Code when writing code. Change this setting to Visual Studio Code. It's possible that this option may not be available. If it isn't, you should restart the Unity editor. Alternatively, you can click on the Browse option to search for the program. After setting the editor, Unity is ready to work with Visual Studio Code. The last step is to configure the code editor. In the next lecture, let's handle this step.